Hi, I'm Alex Kaplan, and I've done a project on the Vikings' presence in Western Europe with a focus on their presence in England as well as their presence in West Francia with Normandy and their relationships with leaders in that region. As somebody that's lived in Denmark for several years and is, in fact, half Danish, I have strong passion for anything to do with Danish culture, really, and that kind of lends into my interest in learning about Viking history, as it is a big part of the culture there, and it's just felt like something I should know. So it was definitely a route I wanted to take for this class and this project. There's a bunch of things associated with Vikings and the Viking brand. Your mind kind of goes to the Netflix documentaries that are, doing quite well for themselves and are quite popular, I'd say. And the Minnesota Vikings, I guess, are up there too. You think of the Longhorns on the logo. That there's just a lot of propaganda kind of terms or things that you associate with Vikings. And part of my project is kind of scrapping that idea and casting some attention to their actual, you know, less barbaric, plundering sort of thing, like an actual developed society and structure and those sorts of things that they actually offered and influenced around the world. A big thing there, just with what I was just saying, I guess, is that they reach so many countries. They go so far west towards North America, all the way down south to Sicily and Spain, and then of course east towards like Russia and those sorts of countries. So, there's a huge influence there, and I wanted to make that less of an understated thing than it is today. Here that my poster really breaks down their geographic influence and their points of advantage and the leaders that developed their structure over the years. They changed so much in their approach when they went from Harald Hardrada to Rollo, for example, as their leader. My poster lays out a bit of a timeline in that way. So let's get to that. Break it down and add some clarity to what exactly this is. Let's just quickly run through the abstract that I wrote, which is the following. The study examines the geopolitical impact of the Vikings on the United Kingdom and West Francia and assesses their strategic mobilization, outstanding ship technology, and otherwise innovative prowess to enforce their threat as they plunder monastic settlements and villages to collect goods and establish bases and ports of their own. And as I stated before, under the guidance of those several Viking leaders, their approach changed so much, and they set out to exploit the political discourse surrounding Charlemagne and related leaders. This study proposes factors that were the most influential towards the Vikings' unlikely success throughout the age of the Vikings, nearly taking down two empires in the Franks and Anglo-Saxons single-handedly. This study finally inquires about the lasting impact of the Vikings' actions on the greater European economy and societal behavior. It also investigates the shift in intent under Rollo's leadership, as I just briefly mentioned. So in this introduction, I speak a little bit about the Bay of Biscay, which is where the Vikings established a headquarters and would pursue and loot monasteries on different European nations. So where better to start than the very first raid on a monastery? So the Viking story begins in 793 off the coast of contemporary Northumbria on Lindisfarne, also known as the Holy Island, which is considered the Sacred Heart of Christianity in this region. According to the 12th century Anglo-Norman chronicler Simeon of Durham, the raiders killed the resident monks or threw them into the sea to drown them or carried them away as slaves, along with some of the church's treasures. News of the devastation spread rapidly, sending shockwaves through the entire European continent. The greatest sort of source of this event's significance is the sheer chaos and discord that it caused within various societies' political structure, agricultural maintenance, and their long-term historical documentation. While this incursion didn't run as nor as significant a power gain as later attacks would, the scale and nature of it were enough to stun all surrounding parties and have the Vikings marked down as a very serious threat to be taken seriously. So let's talk a little bit about some of the Vikings' advantages, points of strength. Firstly, their innovative ship technology. The eventual adaptation of shallow-keeled and clinker-built rowing boats to operate under wind power gave the Vikings of the 9th century the advantage of ships that could move swiftly over long distances, carrying crews of up to 100 people, which could operate without the need for harbors and were able to penetrate far further up river systems than any of their deeper draughted rivals could manage. Due to warm summer temperatures, spring was a popular season to ready the ship and the crew for raiding. Because land travel was time-consuming and great effort was required to penetrate the thick forests of the north, Vikings would turn to the sea to reach their goals. The sea was not only highly accessible, but also opposing forces had no way of sealing it off. The many rivers and fjords running through Scandinavia and Russia facilitated transport of warriors, explorers, traders, and goods, and also helped spread Nordic culture. Secondly, the Vikings were very good at exploiting national and political turmoil at the right times. Political unrest meant that targeted regions were not prepared to defend against the Vikings, and the Vikings were one of the first to catch on to the idea of suddenly taking advantage of this. Two further points of strength were their advanced military technology, such as axes, bows, swords, shields, and armor, as well as their networking. With each town they plundered, they would also set up base and take advantage of any local river systems to expand their maritime capabilities. Now, this is a real key one that I could really talk about for a while, and it's kind of the central argument that I'm trying to make here. You know, as I mentioned a bit before, that very first raid into Lindisfarne was quite brutal, and some of the following ones were the same way, but after a certain period, when Rollo became the leader, it wasn't quite that way. They became a lot more of a structured society, and their intent really just shifted under Rollo's leadership. In particular, historians note a change in activity around 834 AD from smaller scale raids to larger, longer term movement of armies. Rollo would make a plethora of non-hostile acquisitions that were quite strategic and offered a great strength to the band of Vikings in general. Additionally, under Rollo's leadership, the Vikings would leave a lasting impact on the greater European economy and societal behavior to do with government, politics, and economy. A bit before Rollo's reign, in fact, in the mid-800s, the Vikings would reach the heart of West Francia in modern-day Paris. This is the most infamous of their incursions because they swindled Charles the Bald out of a fortune by repeatedly attacking and demanding loot to withdraw, lying each time about being done with them. This was the pinnacle of the Viking success. The shine didn't last forever, though, as widespread famine closer to home would force the Vikings to actually withdraw and settle down a bit. The Vikings needed someone mature and thoughtful. This is where Rollo comes in. Fast forward a little bit to the end of the Viking Age, which was actually not long after all this happened. It became quite evident that these Vikings were not entirely to be perceived as single-faceted, bloodthirsty destructors. They also developed a culture of intricate literature, not to mention their political innovations and revolutionary legal concepts. Fast forward a bit to the conclusion of the Viking Age, which really wasn't that much after the raid into Paris. It became quite evident that these Vikings were not entirely to be perceived as single-faceted, bloodthirsty destructors. They also developed a culture of intricate literature, not to mention their political innovations and revolutionary legal concepts. Rollo, in particular, allowed the Vikings to transform themselves from a nomadic and raiding culture into a settled and prosperous society. This was mainly achieved through his integration with local populations, embrace of Christianity, and expansion of trade and more. The Vikings had a very concrete ethos, which is very evident in the recovered collection of aphorisms called the Sayings of the High One. One of such was, quote, "Never let a bad man know of your misfortunes," or the other, more infamous, "Cattle die, kindred die, we ourselves shall die, but I know one thing that never dies, the reputations of each one dead." There is no doubt that each of the warriors and leaders in Viking history have preserved a legendary legacy since. To conclude, I would like to thank Dr. Langdon for the invaluable guidance and insights that built my greater understanding of this period significantly. I'd also like to thank Dr. Ashforth for your personal guidance and support throughout this project and in years past.